Hello and welcome to Cal Talks. My name is Marcelo Valal. I'm the Forage Extension Specialist and Associate Program Leader for the University of Florida IFAS. Today, our episode is a little bit different. We're going to tap into some of our archives of our sister podcast, Forage Nexus, which I record with my dear friends and colleagues, Bruno Pedreira from the University of Tennessee and Lilian Silva from Clemson University. This podcast was originally created to celebrate the National Forage Week. The National Forage Week is an effort by the American Forage and Grassland Council to raise awareness to the importance of forage and livestock industry in the United States and abroad. And we brought distinguished colleagues to share their perspectives on the big picture of agricultural production systems and to share their thoughts on how forages are an integral part of the future of sustainable agricultural production. In this episode, we select 2 interviews to share with you. The theme is around legumes, how we can implement legumes in forage grazing systems to improve productivity, ecosystem services, and the resilience of our production systems. First, Dr. Jim Muir, Regents Professor of Grassland Ecology at Texas A&M University in Stephenville, shares his vision of how legumes are important components of the diversity of agricultural systems and how our pastures in the future may include a huge diversity of different grasses, forbs, and legumes with secondary compounds to improve animal health, add nitrogen to our system, and improve forage productivity.
So just to get started, Jim, you have focused your work on exploring the role of legumes and their versatile products and services. So why do you think legumes in warm climates are key for the development of sustainable agriculture?
Good morning, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this. This is great. So as a grassland ecologist, I look at the whole system, the whole grassland system. And by grassland, I include savannas, which include trees and so forth. But I look at the whole system because it's not just the plants, but also the soil under them, as well as the animals utilizing them. Within that system, legume plants are extremely important because they fix atmospheric nitrogen. Nitrogen is the limiting factor. I think most of us would agree within grassland systems, keep the cycle going, growing and between soil, plant and animal. And legumes, because they can fix atmospheric nitrogen and make it available to the plant and eventually to the animal, those of us who deal with animal agriculture within grasslands consider it extremely important. So I think the role of providing nitrogen to the system is what makes them a key.
So, Jim, what have been the main challenges in using and adopting native warm season species in livestock operations in this context that we are discussing here today within the systems?
Where to start on that? It's complicated because most of the world, in terms of grasslands and forage legumes, is focused on Mediterranean legumes, like alfalfa, lucerne. And so those have been domesticated within agriculture for millennia, way back before the time of European history basically started. And so those plants are well known in terms of management, but they're not always well adapted to places with warmer climates. And that's where the native legumes come in. And by native, I mean those that were originated within a region. Their genetic origin is within a region. And that can be anywhere from Brazil to South Africa to Australia to North America and any of those places. Native legumes, as opposed to non-native legumes, are extremely important because they are well adapted to the area. They survive. They have a role to play within the local ecosystem. And that includes, for example, feeding insects or, providing habitat to songbirds and so forth, as well as maintaining the nutrition of ruminants, which is what I'm primarily interested in as a forage agronomist.
Jim, I think legumes are those fantastic plants we can use to really add value to the production system, to the ecosystem, and many other benefits. I think one of the questions that I get the most is, okay, so by using legumes now, I don't need to use nitrogen and my grasses are going to grow. Getting on the idea of the mixture for grazing, but also thinking especially on the nitrogen cycle, how is that relationship between the grasses and legumes and the legume adding nitrogen to the system? Is it true that now I have a legume, I don't worry about fertilization anymore?
Depends. That's the favorite professor's answer, right? When we say that legumes are important in adding nitrogen to the system, we're focusing primarily on the animal, on the ruminant, right? Because the ruminant can harvest the nitrogen in the legume, add it to the grass. It all goes into the rumen, and in that rumen microbiome, the microorganisms there take advantage of the nitrogen there to grow and reproduce, and then break down the grass component. So in the rumen, I think we understand, we all agree that legume nitrogen is important. Outside of the animal ecosystem, out of that microbiome, it becomes a little bit more of a debatable situation because very little, we're discovering, I think, as we collect data, very little of the nitrogen that legumes fix from the atmosphere ends up going to the grasses themselves. We used to think that there was a lot of cycling back to the grasses, so the grasses benefited directly from the legume. And we're finding more and more that it isn't quite that simple, because by the time the legume plant material breaks down and goes through the soil, is available to the grass to pick up, we've lost, I don't know, wild guess, we've lost maybe 95% of the nitrogen. It's volatilized back into the atmosphere. And so, like I said, it depends. If you look at it from the ruminant perspective, and I'm talking about wildlife, like white-tailed deer, as well as, cattle or sheep or goats that were interested in agriculture, without question, the forage legume is extremely important and provides a lot of nitrogen to that system. Within the grasslands itself, much more debatable.
So, Jim, just kind of like going in that direction still, but now thinking more on mixtures. So we often refer to the benefits of the nitrogen that legumes can add, but also they can have some other benefits, such as the tannin that some of those legumes have. So I know you have a lot of work on that part. So I'd like for you to share some of the thoughts that you have on that direction, but also, and I know it's going to be a long question here, but also thinking about maybe even on the native species context, so you can define what mixtures you're going to use and maybe incorporate some of those aspects, but also thinking about the restoration of systems, some of those things, like what you could share with us in terms of the benefits and maybe challenges, or even how to think about complementary mixtures that may work better for systems.
Okay. So you have 2 hours? You have 2 hours to answer that question?
That was a complex one.
I mean, and it's a long question because it's a very complex system. Going back a little bit to Marcelo's question, which I never quite answered, if you want grasses to thrive within a grass legume mixture, because legumes don't provide as much as we thought they did, you do need to add nitrogen to the grass, a grassland system, in order to keep the grasses productive. But whenever you do that, then you favor the grasses over the legumes, then the legumes tend to disappear and so forth. That sort of complexity makes mixtures a challenge in pastures. And I'm talking about cultivated pastures as well as native or natural pastures, which in North America we call rangeland. In South Africa, for example, they call it the veldt. So in those systems, the mixtures become very complex. It's almost an art to maintain the balance between legumes and grasses and the animal. Because legumes tend to be more palatable than grasses to animals, so they tend to focus on them. They'll graze them out of the system. One of the reasons why I'm very interested in legume tannins is because tannins tend to make legumes less palatable. And so if you work with legumes that have condensed tannins or anti-palatability compounds in them, you can make it so that the palatability of the grass and the legume become more or less equal, so that the ruminant has less of a tendency to graze one out over the other. One of the issues that I'm looking at, one of the reasons why I very much enjoy working with native legumes is because, for example, here in North Texas, we have about 50 different native herbaceous legumes in the grassland. 50. And most of the times, we as forage agronomists get very excited about a mixture of one legume and one grass. It's like we've succeeded. And in nature, we're talking a mixture of 50 legumes with probably 30 or 40 or even 50 native grasses. And then the animals that survive, and by animals, I mean insects as well as, small mammals and ruminants and so forth. And so maintaining those balances, maintaining the biodiversity within an ecosystem, whether it's cultivated or whether it's natural, becomes almost an art. And, there's always a tendency for us to simplify things. And if we can, set up a pasture and put the cow or the goat or the sheep in there and walk away and go fishing for the day, we're like, good, life is good. If the mixture is so complex that we have to be there managing it, micromanaging it all the time, then we have less time for fishing, right? And so the secret to me, as I get older and lazier, is to let the plants do the compatibility. You heard it here first, but I predict that within the next 20 years, I'll be long gone. You'll still be working hard. Within the next 20 years, cultivated pastures, rangelands, we already have that complex mixture, but cultivated pastures, we will not have any almost cultivated pastures that are not mixtures of at least 20 or 30 different species of grasses and forbs. That's my prediction. Within 20 years, you can come back to this recording, say, this old guy, wait, what? He predicted this a long time ago.
Our second interview is with Dr. Jamie Foster, also a professor at Texas A&M University in Beeville. Dr. Foster is a well-known researcher in the forage world, and she has a lot of practical insight in how we can implement legumes into forage systems, what challenges our producers face, and the strategies that can help us overcome that implementation phase to achieve the best results in grass and legume mixes in our pastures. So, throughout your career, you have been involved in developing research and incorporating the use of legumes for livestock systems. What are the major benefits of having those legumes for livestock production?
When we typically think about legumes, the primary benefit that they provide for livestock is additional protein. Legumes have a greater protein concentration than the grass-based diet, but also there can be more accessible nutrients, microminerals, and especially carbohydrates to the ruminal microbes by nature of the shape of the leaf veins. That's something we don't think about a lot of time. But we look at our legume, they have veination that spreads apart. So it allows the rumen microbes to attach and use some of the cellulose that's there. And that's not always the case with some of the grasses. So when we increase the protein, we really drive the growth of the microbes in the rumen, can make some of the cellulose more accessible as well because of the difference in the leaf veins between our forbs or legumes and the grasses. So the bigger picture for the integration of legumes into our grassland systems for livestock, we typically see increased nitrogen in the system. Of course, we may not have to apply as much or any inorganic fertilizer. In a lot of our systems in the United States, we're not applying fertilizers. But additionally, things we might not think about that aren't as obvious, some work by Gerald Evers in East Texas showed that we may be able to also reduce our herbicide inputs in the early spring because when we're planting a cool season legume into a warm season pasture, that winter and spring growth of the legume competes with the weeds that might be emerging. It shades them out and is also competing for water and nutrients. So we can see some really great things, reduce fertilizer input, reduce herbicide input, and improved nitrogen cycling as well.
So Jamie, in your experience, what have been the major challenges that you saw producers facing when they wanted to adopt legumes?
Well, we know and we teach that legumes are really important. They diversify a grassland system. It's related to resilience and sustainability and improved soil health. But I think the bottom line for most landowners are the cost. And then we might think of, that seed. If we look at iron and clay cowpea, that's a great warm season legume. Seed is not very expensive. We do have some other legume options, especially natives, that might be a bit more expensive. But while our seed and our inoculant is not very expensive, we might forget the access to planting equipment and labor that might not be available everywhere. So keep in mind that 79% of the ranches in the United States had fewer than 50 cows. in 2022. What we know is when we have 500 head of cows, the average cost per cow annually is $910. That more than doubles to over 2,000 when the herd size is only 20 to 49, which is the majority of our landowners. And that's because of economy of scale. So it's not feasible for the majority of our landowners with smaller land holdings and smaller herds to invest in some of the planting equipment. And that's a big hurdle to overcome, I think. And then on top of that, we think about when you have a smaller land holding and your herd size is about 50 cows, you probably have the majority of your income coming from off the ranch. And if you're not there on a daily basis, it can be a bit more tricky to try to manage a grass and legume mixture. So I think those two primary things, the investment costs to actually get the legume planted and the management that can be a little bit more complex when you're not managing a monoculture, are probably the major reasons that we don't see as much legume adoption here in the United States.
Yeah, that's great. That brings me to forage management, right? I understand what you're saying. Here in Tennessee is the same. Most of my producers have on average 30, 35 cows in the farms here for Tennessee overall. But on the other side, we always talking about improving the resilience of the forage systems. It's something that's essential for us right now. And we also need to put all of this together with the drought conditions we have been having. So what do we need to change, Jamie, in terms of forage management strategies to be able to achieve this resilience and get a better forage system?
So there is no silver bullet. I think we all learned that. The answer most of the time is it depends. I think broadly, unfortunately, only 40% of our ranches have some sort of rotational stocking system. You know, the proper scientific way of labeling that is rotational stocking. You might just hear it commonly rotational grazing, same thing, right? So even if you have a smaller land holding with 50 cows, if you could split that in half and have 2 paddocks, that gives you so much more flexibility to manage your forage. 3, 4 splits can even be better. But the reason for that is because, especially in a drought, we're able to do things like destock as much as we possibly can without losing all of our genetics. And then we can have a sacrifice paddock where we know we're hammering that forage in that specific area. We're going to get rain eventually. We regrow in the other paddock. And when it's ready and it's had enough regrowth to survive defoliation, we move our animals to the next paddock. And we can focus on any work we might need to do to get the forage in our sacrifice pasture back up to where it needs to be. So I think rotational stocking and then also our stocking rate are the two things we always really talk about in our ability to manage our forage. Stocking rates are something we might not consider. Our cow size has increased tremendously over the years. It's crazy to look at pictures of, the 1950 stock show prize animal compared to our prize animal these days. So greater body size means it needs more forage, right? So if we still have the same number of animals on that same amount of acreage, you need to consider your stocking rate. I think when we may not want to stock lightly because we aren't getting as much average daily gain, and we aren't getting as much pounds off of that acreage, but what we do get is very healthy forage with good nutrient cycling that can regrow quickly, more quickly than a heavy stocking rate following drought or other stresses.
So perfect segue to the next question about nutrient cycling. We talked in the previous episode with Dr. Muir about nutrient cycling and the idea that many people have, okay, legumes are just going to give the nitrogen to the grass crop. I don't need to fertilize anymore. It's like, nope, just let's step back a little bit and think about the cycling. So what's the importance of the nutrient cycling, especially nitrogen, in those legume-based forage production systems?
So I'm glad that you all invited Dr. Muir to join you. I did train with him for my master's degree, and I learned a lot. I think I come at nutrient cycling in a roundabout way, and that's working with fellow soil scientists as a team. And when we think about our soil and our plant and what makes happy soil health, that then can drive a lot of forage production, I think the ultimate crux that we look at is carbon. It definitely has benefits to climate smart and greenhouse gas emissions, but our soil organic matter, which is the storage of the carbon, is what's going to hold water in the system and also drive the microbes. And the microbes are what's cycling the nutrients to make them plant available again after the plant litter falls to the ground or our animal defecates or urinates in the pasture. So when we have legumes in the system, there's very little leaching from the roots that makes it just automatically available to the neighboring grasses. Where we get benefit is then when in a grazing system that legume is consumed and the higher protein concentration is excreted by the animal across the pasture. Then our soil microbes are using the soil carbon to grow, and they use then the manure and the urine to start converting nitrogen into more plant available forms. And then also over time, that legume is not going to live year round. So you're going to get litter from that plant and then the roots that are in the soil that are then being used to drive the soil microbial growth to make it plant available. So I think the tools that we think of to help with sustainability and resilience and soil health, we're really just couching all these same tools in a different package, right? But they're bottom line kind of the same. We want to diversify our pasture, and a really great way to do that is to add legumes. We want to manage our forage so that it can regrow quickly following stress like defoliation and drought. And that comes back to our grazing management.
We hope you have enjoyed this podcast. If you're interested in more topics, check the other episodes of the Cow Talks podcast and also our sister podcast, Forage Nexus. There is a lot of content there that we'd love to share with you. If you have any thoughts, ideas, or comments, reach out to us through forages@ifas.ufl.edu and share your thoughts to help improving this show. Cow Talk Podcast was brought to you by the University of Florida Forage Team with technical support from the University of Florida College of Agriculture and Life Sciences Faculty Instructional Resource and Support Team. This episode was produced by Marcelo Valal, Olivia Maule, and Ashley Kanabrowski.